Celebrating a brand new book, The Essential W. Royal Stokes, Jazz, Blues, and Beyond, The Reader. And we have Royal on the line now to tell us a bit about his latest missive. Royal, welcome to WPFW.
Thank you, Rusty.
It's really good to hear your voice. Used to hear your voice every weekend many years ago on WGTB on Saturdays and Sundays. Since Mittens, and I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say was the names of your shows over there, WGTB.
Yes, I did that show, which was on Saturday mornings. Originally, it was on Sunday afternoons. And then on Saturday mornings and on Wednesday evenings, I did a show that I named Since Minton's. The Bolden show on Saturday mornings was old jazz and blues, and Since Minton's picked up with the music that came after Minton's in the 40s.
And that was at a time when you were really sort of running the station at WGTB and running around all over the place doing reviews and stuff like that. But let's go back a few years and let's talk a little bit about how you got into this music we call jazz.
Well, that took place in January 1943. My older brother, Billy, had joined the U.S. Navy and gone off to World War II and had left behind a half-dozen Decca Blue Label 78 RPMs. I had shown no interest in the music coming out of his bedroom, but I had to investigate once he had vacated that room, so I went in there and put one of them on the turntable. It was Boogie Woogie. All six of the 78s were Boogie Woogie. Meet Lux Lewis, Pete Johnson. There was a small Woody Herman group and several others. And I just dug that sound from the very first. And I started spending all of my newspaper route and babysitting money on Boogie Woogie 78 RPMs. I moved on. I should mention that, of course, those were the years of the Boogie Woogie craze. Pioneer Boogie Woogie pianists from the 1920s were resurfacing, and some of them were recording, and a lot of reissues were coming out. Mead Lux and Albert Ammons were recording for Blue Note, and I used to buy those 12-inch 78s. I also soon discovered a new music, new to me. It was the time of the New Orleans revival. Pioneer New Orleans musicians, the likes of Bunk Johnson, were being rediscovered and recording, and so I started picking up those 78s also. I moved on, of course, to Eddie Condon on the Commodore label and into the swing era, and soon discovered Jazz at the Philharmonic, which was my introduction to bebop. And I just moved on through the years as a collector, a hobby, really, because I had an earlier career as a professor of Greek and Latin languages and literature, and taught at 5 universities during the 1960s.
Now, you're a native Washingtonian, if I remember correctly, but you had traveled around the country with your academic posts.
Yes, I lived in Seattle. I lived in New Haven, Connecticut, where I was doing my doctorate at Yale. I lived in Pittsburgh, one of my first teaching gigs. And I also spent a couple of years in Italy during the mid-'60s teaching for the Tufts University Study Abroad program for American college students. So I have been here and there.
Absolutely. What brought you back to Washington, D.C.?
What brought me back to Washington, D.C.? Well, I finished off my academic career at the University of Colorado in 1969, the school year of 68-69, and I actually dropped out of the academic scene there was a time when people did a lot of dropping out.
Right.
And I actually became a hippie for a couple of years.
Wow.
And just ended up in New England for a year, and then down here in Washington, D.C., because that's where I started.
So what brought you to WGTB?
That is another story. I was in late 1971. I was listening to my favorite radio station, WGTB-FM, and the disc jockey played a boogie-woogie number, and it sounded so much like a 1928 reissue that I had that I called him up, and it turned out not to be an early recording, but a more recent one. Anyway, the disc jockey invited me to join him as a guest once a week for an hour and bring some of my records, and that started it all. I did that for a couple of months and was assigned a Sunday afternoon slot for my own program.
Boy, that sounds so much like my start at WGTB a few years earlier in 1966 when I saw a young man with a bunch of albums while we were at this place called Tea Hands. And we got into a conversation, and he said, well, I got to give up my show. Can you come by next Monday and take it over? Just WGTB was a great jumping off point for both of us. So in the 70s, you did a lot of writing for the Washington Post, reviews. I've been going through just an incredible array of reviews in your book, The Essential Royal Strokes. How did you make that association with the Post?
Well, I had started writing on jazz in the early 70s for small jazz society magazines like the Potomac River Jazz Club's Tailgate Ramblings, and I also started writing book reviews for Radio Free Jazz, which was the first name of Jazz Times. And then in 1978, Bill Kirstner called me up. He had been writing jazz reviews for the Washington Post. In fact, was the principal jazz writer for the paper, and he wanted to become a full-time musician. He was a musician, but he wanted to move to New York and dedicate his time to that pursuit. And he persuaded me to come down and apply for the job, which I did, and they took me on the basis of my, up to that point, very few writings on jazz, and the fact that I had been on the radio for a half dozen or so years. So I became, for the next decade or so, from 1978 through most of the 80s, the principal writer on jazz for the Washington Post.
Now, back in those days, this is, sort of pre-computer and pre-internet, so you would catch a performance at the One Step Down or Blues Alley, and frequently you would call in your reviews?
I would call them in. I can tell you how that sort of thing took place. I would take notes in, for instance, the One Step Down in the semi-dark,
right.
And I would stay for the opening set because I had to call my review in by midnight. So I would stay for the opening set, taking notes, and then I would go to my car and sit in it and, with the aid of a flashlight, write up my 200-word review, and then go to a payphone and call it in, long before the time of cell phones.
Boy, it was incredible, though, in terms of the number of reviews that you have in your book that you assembled. It's just mind-boggling. But the book also contains profiles. You have a whole chapter on D.C. area musicians. Your other chapters on out of town, the musicians of the modern era of jazz. How did you decide to assemble the book?
Well, I did it by periods. The opening section is on musicians of early styles of jazz, and then I moved on to the next chapter of modern styles, and after that, as you noted, a chapter on D.C. area musicians, and also one on overseas musicians. So that's how that organization came about.
And in terms of tracking down material and stuff like that, did you have everything available to you, or did you have to reach out and go to archives and things like that to put the material together?
Well, I would always read up on a musician before interviewing him.
No, I'm not talking about putting the book together in terms of the material that after you've you've got interviews from the 70s and 80s in the book, of course, and that would entail that research. But I'm talking about assembling it for the book itself.
I'm not clear on what you're trying to get at.
I'm trying to say, did you keep everything that you wrote?
Yes.
So you had it all together and just had to put it in the book?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have always followed the advice that the late Martin Williams gave me many, many decades ago, I think in probably the 1970s, when I first met him, although I had been reading him for a couple of decades in the periodicals. He told me to save everything, and so I have.
and it looks like, as big as this book is, you put it all together in this essential W. Royal Stokes Jazz, Blues, and Beyond reader.
Let me just say that the collection in the book does not constitute all of those materials that I saved over the 3 or 4 decades that I was writing. I've been writing on jazz for a half century, since the early 70s. If I used all of that material, it would be a set of about 4 volumes.
I'm sure. We got 560 pages in this volume. Tell folks how they can get a hold of it.
Well, if one goes on to Amazon.com, and in the search tool space at the top, type in W. Royal Stokes, The Essential. You don't even have to go for the entire title, and it'll bring it right up. And when it brings it up, and a matter of fact, when you click on it and you have it taking up the full page, you can then also click on my name, and it will go to another page showing all of my books.
So now, much of your other books have been published by Oxford University Press.
Yes.
And that was a wonderful association. Tell us a little bit about that and how you managed to make that connection.
Well, I'll also mention a name that I just referred to, Martin Williams. In the late 80s, when I was departing the Washington Post and getting serious about publishing a book, I called up my friend Martin. We often talked on the phone, and even in person for that matter. And I said, how do I go about trying to get a jazz book published, Martin? And he said, call up my publisher, my editor at Oxford. I said, what's his name? And he said, Sheldon Meyer. And he gave me his phone number, and I called him up, and he said, Martin has often talked about you, Royal.
Oh, wow.
Can you send me a few writing samples, which I did, mailing them, of course, again, long before the time of email. And he said, let's get a book together. And he did the same thing several years later. I published 3 volumes of interviews and profiles with Oxford, and Sheldon edited all 3 of them.
He's a legendary editor. He really was someone that
he was. I want to mention that I guess he died about 20 some years ago, and in around 1990 or something like that, I wrote a letter to the Downbeat editor suggesting that he be a lifetime awardee, the non-musical awardee for that year. And they replied, yes, we agree with you. He should be, and we want you to write it, Royal.
Wow.
So that's how that happened. In fact, that is in the reader.
It's an incredible book, and I really urge all of my listeners to go to Amazon and get it. It's the one place that it is available. Royal, I'm working with Davy Yarborough on an oral history project of some of the clubs in Northeast, including Bill Harris's Pigfoot, Moore's Love and Peace, Mr. Wise, and Rhode Island Plaza. And I was wondering if you had any remembrances of those clubs as you were reviewing and getting the material into the Washington Post.
Well, I particularly remember Mr. Wise because although I went to Bill Harris's Bigfoot a few times, I only reviewed an act there once or twice because I could not make the choices where I was sent to review.
Sure. Okay.
And
wow.
During the first couple of years that I was reviewing, Bigfoot was in operation, but I believe it went out of existence. And also the Moore's Love and Peace. I reviewed a couple of times there. I remember that Davy and Esther were there.
Absolutely.
And but Mr. Wise, I remember, I for some reason, I was often sent to review at Mr. Wise, that little upstairs club. And it was a wonderful scene, very intimate, and often featured not only local artists, but the headliner might be somebody down from New York, and that made it very interesting. I have a few of those reviews from Mr. Wise in the book.
Fantastic. I remember the late Gail Dixon, who was the one who booked and greeted you at the door. Fantastic club. The steps going up, kind of bisecting the performance area. So that was
and Gail did the booking, I believe.
Yes, she did. She was really incredible.
I heard her sing once at Charlie's.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
On they used to have a jam session night, and she got up and did a wonderful number.
She was a marvelous vocalist as well, and a community activist when she was living here in Washington. She's certainly missed. Royal, I'm going to tell your age. You're 90 years old.
I was 90 in June.
And you told me you were working on another project that you're
yes.
still busy. Tell us about it.
Yes, it'll be my 10th book. If you go on Amazon, you'll see that there are 8 books listed. I count as my first book, making it 9, my Yale doctoral dissertation on Homer.
Okay, I guess that counts.
So what I'm working on now is my 10th book, a memoir, and I've actually been working on it off and on for several years, along with putting together the reader, and so I'm moving right along with it.
Well, we're looking forward to it, and again, the Essential is available on Amazon. The Essential W. Royal Stokes Jazz, Blues, and Beyond Reader. Royal, I really want to thank you for touching base with us tonight, and I hope this sells a few of your books, because this is really essential for folks here in Washington in particular, with all the great reviews. And I was just reading the profile of Joanne Brackeen, who was performing at the One Step Down. It was like a preview of her performance there that you had in the Washington Post, and it was just, so thrilling to go through and see articles like that.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for this opportunity to get the word out, Rusty.
It's my pleasure. So we'll close out the interview with my friend Joanne Brackeen right now. And again, thanks again, Royal. Stay safe. We'll be talking with you.
Thanks, Rusty, and you stay safe too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.